You need to be able to convey the value of BPM in understandable terms. Make sure that your stakeholders understand exactly what BPM is and the value that it provides.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get the absolute privilege of sitting down with different individuals that work in the space of process within organizations or as consultants. And that can cover a range of different roles. We've been talking to C-suite executives about, how does process tie into strategy? We talk to senior business analysts. We talk to process improvement specialists. We're talking to a range of people. And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Marcus Udokang. Now, Marcus is currently a project manager at Aivaz Consulting and was also a former senior business analyst, has worked in a range of different organizations, including a couple of universities I saw there, but has over 15 years of information technology experience. So I'm really excited for this interview. Marcus, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So what we might do to kick us off is if you can give myself and our audience a bit more of a grid and background for who you are. I guess maybe take us back to when business process first piqued your interest, and then take us on a journey leading up to where you are today.
Okay. So most of my experience really has been in IT or software development. And I got started in BPM rather accidentally, like many people. I was given the opportunity to support coworkers on a database. I was running queries, building reports, that kind of thing. And I needed to learn more about the business processes. So I spent some time digging into BPM. And I think I may have gone maybe a bit overboard, perhaps beyond my duties, but it was something that I wanted to do to learn more. It may not have been an initial deliberate interest, I think, in BPM, but I was working with clients. I was trying to understand their needs through the customer experience. And there were lots of challenges in trying to train employees on new technology, to introduce more efficient ways to manage customer accounts, to track customer purchases, things like that. So I think the technology solutions in that particular department at the time were sluggish, and they needed some form of improvement. And we had an external vendor who was given the task of providing a new technology solution to manage customer purchases, right, which required changes to those business processes. So I think process really helped to give, well, for me at least, process helped to give that technology context. And we, BPM software solutions were sort of used to help them to model and map out processes as well. Mm. I think the adoption for the users was not always very open and willing.
Right.
So as an IT support person, my job was to help employees adapt to these new business processes using technology. Mm-hmm. I think that process efficiency was really key to that change. So as you briefly mentioned, I've worked with some educational institutions. I've also worked with startups, small companies, medium companies, and even some larger global corporations like IBM and Shell years ago. So, I've had this sort of broad range of experience, I think, with different sized organizations in different domains. And it's allowed me to see how different business processes work throughout those various types of organizations.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's good. And I think what you're saying there about, getting that adoption, that is something that I continually hear, and it has come up in other interviews where, you are working with people and you need to bring people along for the journey. It's not something that you can sort of, mandate that, yep, this is the new system. This is what we're using now. And you all just have to jump on board. I even know people in my own, personal network sphere that when I have conversations with them at the Saturday afternoon barbecue, they're complaining about the new IT systems that are being put in place because they're like, we don't understand it. We don't know how to use it. We feel like it's not something that I want to adopt, and so I'm seeing it from both sides that it is very much, how do you how do you communicate with people? How do you bring people along for that journey? So.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So with, I guess, you've got quite a range of experience there. Talking about the challenges that you see an organization face when adopting BPM, and you've obviously worked with small organizations up to very large organizations, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing?
Well, I think there's a number of them. So BPM strategy comes to mind. Well-run, well-executed BPM strategy. That's top of the list. And what that really encompasses, I think, is a number of things. So if I could just touch on them briefly. So I'd say moving beyond technology, and like the example you gave about people not wanting to adapt to new technology. It's not always the technology, right? So organizations often see BPM as simply a tool, or maybe it's a consultant that's brought in to make a recommendation on new technology. So in reality, to make this meaningful contribution to business, I think the BPM needs to think holistically about the changes that it recommends and that it wants to put into place. So that holistic approach can be met with resistance, like the example you gave. So as BPM, it's sort of, BPM might be seen as overstepping its role. And so BPM consultants and the companies, who pay them need to understand that business process management, it's about the end-to-end process. It's not just the technology, right? So from a process perspective, in order to change, you need to know where you are, where you're starting from, where you need to go to make that change happen. So business strategy is our BPM strategy, encompassing going beyond technology. That's one big challenge. Then you've got the buy-in, the poor buy-in from executive leaders, right? You might have BPM where it might have a history of promising everything and not always delivering. So there's some truth to that, but I think the current climate these days is there's more pressure to do more with less. And I think there's opportunity for automation, microservices to drive process efficiency. You can combine, so this means that there's more need for BPM and a higher chance that BPM success can occur, with the tools that you have. So getting that buy-in from executives, that can be a hurdle. And briefly to touch on what you mentioned earlier also is getting that buy-in from end users. You need those the champions of BPM, the BPM consultants. They really need to work together to make sure that end users understand this change. So I think the managers of BPM need to meet, collaborate with end users, right? During the requirements gathering, during the process mapping, explain where those bottlenecks are and the opportunities that exist for improvement. And, a lot of times when you go in to make change, people will think, is my job at jeopardy, right? So you want to sort of lay bare those concerns and let the end users know that, don't so much focus on that, focus on the fact that, we're going to help you change to make your jobs more efficient. You really want to make that central. And you can do so by explaining the technology. How does it work? Why was it chosen? So try and engage the end users by getting them to test it, to provide you with feedback. You can set expectations around deliverables around your output. So poor buy-in from end users, and these are kind of ways to overcome that. And so I'd have to say, buy-in from executives and end users, conveying that holistic view of BPM, being dynamic enough to respond to the changing landscape as well.
That's great. And I love what you're saying there about collaboration, because I think that's such a key part of it is, how can you not just tell people what they need to be doing, but I guess almost empowering them to, because these people that are carrying out these processes, or they are the subject matter experts, they're the ones that are in the positions where they're probably in the best position to identify any pain points, any problems, any challenges. So in sort of, I guess, creating that atmosphere and empowering them to identify these areas of opportunity, when that change does take place, they're probably going to take a lot more ownership of it, because they weren't just told they should do this. They're the ones that actually came up or identified the problem and then came up with a potential solution for it. So I think, that collaboration point, that is huge. And you also mentioned about, sometimes feeling that, the BPM practitioners can sort of sometimes, that the feeling is that they're overstepping their role or their boundary. And I think it's such an interesting position to be in, because the whole idea behind BPM is to be that cross-functional, to have that cross-functional perspective, to almost have their finger in each department and to make it all work together. So it's obvious, it is pretty clear that, there are going to be people in the departments being like, hang on a second, what are you doing? You're not from this department. What would you know? So that would be something that I'd imagine maybe you've experienced before in organizations.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. And I think that's why communication is so important, because you have to be able to articulate why you're there, what your role will be, and how you can help and engage those users with your solutions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And you mentioned there about, obviously getting that buy-in from the executive level, that executive team. I guess one of the biggest things that they're going to be asking or wondering, well, what is the return on investment? What are some of the wins that you've seen with BPM, and then how can that work for our organization? So do you have any, I guess, wins that come to mind, whether it's, a small process has been tweaked and significant value was delivered, or maybe it's more of a radical transformation, a radical innovation of an entire business unit or something like that?
Yeah, you could have a variety of wins. So I think one win is that common standard process at the enterprise level, right? So like you said, how do we reduce costs? How do we standardize offerings? Are you following government regulations? Was that part of your deliverable?
Mm-hmm.
Was it to get regulatory compliance or legal compliance, or are you supposed to follow certain privacy laws? Have you implemented this? And how have you done so? That's one. And I think that also maybe having a common repository. Processes should be stored in a central location so every employee has access to them. So that's another big one, I would say. Reducing risks and data redundancy. So you've got a BPM tool. It's going to provide you total visibility into your business process, which allows for a special focus on certain errors, for example, right? And this in turn could give the organization the chance to work more efficiently, help them to save resources. So I'd also say better control of operations. So regardless of how well controlled or how solid that your business processes are, it's important to always have control of the tasks that are running. Who's working on what, whether or not these deadlines are being met. So you've got BPM software that provides you, it gives you live access to information, like your dashboards, your data charts, enabling you to monitor execution and progress. So it's a better control of operations. And I'd say, and again, this comes back to the concept of communication, improved business collaboration. If you want collaboration among your team members, well, that has to be crucial. But especially if you have multiple tasks, multiple processes running, you've got to get that collaboration. So, there's traditional ways of communicating. Of course, we've got email now. We've got email notifications, file sharing. There's a whole slew of communication channels you can use to make communication between people much easier right? So improved business, this is all part of business collaboration. And I think everyone who's using the system has always provided real-time information with these dashboards, like I mentioned, right? You want to make sure that you're reducing any data redundancy. You want to be able to sleep at night. Your general business issues are being taken care of through improved business collaboration. And let me see, what else could I say? I'd probably say maybe there's a bit of agility too, right? BPM software, it could smooth the design process and make it more flexible, I think. So that comes from a bit of agility. So yeah, I think that would be it. You've got some agility, improved business collaboration, better control of operations, trying to reduce risks and data redundancy, and having that common repository, and of course, common standard processes at the enterprise level. So,
yes. Right. That's good. And I guess looking at the year that we've just had, because, it's been quite a turbulent year for many organizations. And, I have heard a lot about process. I think a lot of organizations are talking about process this year because, things have been disrupted for them. Organizations that were able to work in the same office building, they're now spread out across the country. I'm not sure what it's like over in Canada, but here in Australia, at least, I know that there are, organizations of thousands of employees that went from all in the one space to working from home offices the very next day or the very next week. But how has BPM played a part in the year that we have had in the turbulent nature of, I guess, everything we've experienced?
I think that's where agility comes in. Much more easily being able to be flexible enough to pivot with change. So obviously COVID was a huge dramatic change. And if BPM is able to step on that bandwagon and pivot with that change, I think maybe more BPM practitioners would be hired in order to be able to create a good solution to how do you overcome COVID, right? This is a perfect example, right? So I think being agile is definitely quite important.
Yeah. And you also mentioned before, or you're talking about before, having dashboards that you can rely on and you can see the data and see insights into your process. And I think that's something that, if the executive team were adopted BPM and decided, yep, this is the direction we want to head in, they're not going to be spending their time on the low level processes that they won't have the time to give to that. But what they do want to see is, that high level overview, maybe that process architecture, or at least how do the processes tie into the strategy? How do they link into the overall direction of the business and the value that we're creating? So I guess how does process tie into strategy? How can an organization do that well?
How does process tie into strategy? I'd probably say that you have to make sure that your processes encompass the goals, the values, the objectives of the company, and that's all part and parcel of the strategy, right? If you're not paralleling strategy, then why are you there, right? The entire purpose is to make sure that those BPM solutions do parallel strategy as well. Encompass those goals, encompass those values, making sure you get buy-in from the people who matter, from the higher ups, right? From the proper executives. I think that's all part of it.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think, we've seen this year, there's a particular company that comes to mind that before COVID, they were running about 168 different programs. This is a huge organization over here in Australia. And when COVID hit, they dropped from 168 to 20 programs because, they were forced to evaluate, what are we doing? Is it delivering value? Does it tie into our strategy? And if it's not, then what is it? Why are we doing it? And so I guess a lot of hard questions, a lot of big questions were asked this year to be able to, I guess, cut down on the fat, because you don't want your workforce just doing work for work's sake. You don't want, process modelers modeling processes for mapping's sake. Where does it tie into the strategy, and where is the value being delivered? Because there are many organizations that have gone on, a process mapping exercise, and that it's taken them 6, 12, 18 months to map all of the organization's processes. They get to the end of it and they're like, why do we do that again? Why do we start that in the first place? And there was no bigger purpose. There was no bigger why behind what they were doing. It didn't tie into the strategy. So they kind of documented it all, made no improvements, didn't identify any opportunities, just left it there to collect dust. And then everyone's wondering why they started that in the first place. But
it happens.
Yeah. But do you have any, I guess, examples where, or specific examples where an organization has adopted BPM and they received significant value from that work, whether it's on a small scale or a big scale? Like any specific examples, and obviously censor any company names or any people names that you're not allowed to say. So.
Yeah. I think one good example was where we moved from the company I was working for moved from 300-400 people to 3,000 people overnight, and so the old processes weren't working, and they really literally overnight had to find new ways of doing things, and one way was to just hire skilled people who could do that. At that time, I wasn't as involved with BPM as I am now, but it was good to be able to watch those people around who were quite skilled, be able to adopt to that change, adopt the change and adapt to that change easily. So I guess that would probably be one example. A second example was having staff, and this sort of relates to the first thing I mentioned earlier in the interview, having staff who weren't really technically adept, trying to go from an old system into a new system that was more web related. They were used to not necessarily a mainframe, but it was more a PC, maybe an intranet of sorts. And now they had to deal with this extranet. How do they function when your times, say for example, in registering clients was supposed to be during a certain office hour from 9 to 5. Now you had clients who could register for items 24/7, and now your timing is off. So people had to understand how they could relate to the concept of a 24-hour system. That's just one quick example. But in both cases, I think it was a smooth transition because people were able to see what they needed in the future, and they were able to get people on board relatively well. I mean, there were some people who couldn't adapt. And you'll always have that, right? You'll have maybe 60% of people who are on board, 20% of people who are really gung-ho, and those 60%, maybe they need some training, and you try and get the really good 20% people who are highly skilled to train that 60%. And you might get the 20% who aren't keen on adapting to that change, and they'll probably adapt just out of circumstances, or they might leave. They might leave the organization and go somewhere else. But anyhow, that's what I found.
No, that's interesting. And I think another topic that I'm quite interested in at the moment is, I guess, that challenge or that battle between being a reactive organization and being a proactive organization, but specifically related to understanding and improving your business processes, because I think there are a lot of organizations that I'm aware of that are probably more reactive. So if there's a problem, if there's a pain point, let's see how we can improve it. Let's see how we can fix it. Let's see how we can tweak it. And then there's that other side where it's, how are we creating the future? How are we doing things that haven't been done before? And it's almost like two different mindsets. And I feel like you need both. I feel like every organization, you need to understand, well, what are the pain points? What are the problems? Where can we make small tweaks that can deliver significant value? But but also that lens that, well, what is the future and how are we going to be creating the future as an organization? Because if we don't create the future, one of our competitors will, or a startup company, a small company that can adapt and can be flexible, can come into an industry like we've seen many times over the last 10, 15 years and totally disrupted an entire industry because they're thinking outside the box. They're doing the process in a different way than it's ever been done before. So how should BPM professionals balance their time or balance their focus on improving existing processes and creating new processes?
So essentially, probably you need to get, I think what you really need to get is buy-in. I think you need to get buy-in.
Right.
You're not going to get anything done unless you get buy-in, right?
Yep.
So because what's involved, your ROI, your cost, your value, how long it'll take to get these things done. So before you even think of how you're going to get there, you've got to get some form of buy-in. And so you've got to start asking concrete questions, I think. Concrete questions like, are you achieving your goals? And if not, we can help you to get there. Are you saving the time and the costs or the resources that you want? If not, a BPM solution could help you get there. And so, you change activities, or change activities in general, rather, I should say, are going to deliver measurable desired outcomes. And those desired outcomes are going to deliver or enable benefits. And some benefits, once they're realized, they're going to deliver quantifiable dollar value. So can we help executives understand what they have? And can we help them to improve what they have? Okay, so how do employees do their activities? Well, like I said, you're going to go from activities, delivering measurable outcomes, desired outcomes, delivering those benefits. And of course, those benefits, once they're realized, you can deliver that quantifiable value. So I think that helps.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that you've got, quite a bit of process mapping experience, or you've done that in the past. What are some of the biggest, mistakes an organization will make or an individual will make when process mapping, when trying to document the process, make sure that it's easily understood, easily consumable?
Charter. Do you have a committed active leadership? No charter? No, a project charter sort of identifies the issues that are going to be resolved, the solutions, the scope. If you don't have a charter, I think that can definitely be an issue. I think if you don't have consensus, you need to be able to leverage the diversity of stakeholders during the planning phases. That's very important too, I think. So people are more likely to adopt your decisions if they have an opportunity to influence, right? So you need to be able to get better involvement in the planning and making sure that you don't under-involve certain stakeholders, and you also don't over-involve certain stakeholders. Know where the stakeholders need to be used, where their skill needs to be acquired at certain phases during the BPM planning. So, and I think also you need to be able to convey the value of BPM in understandable terms. Make sure that your stakeholders understand exactly what BPM is and the value that it provides. So you need this common language, right? Explain to your boss that before we even get into planning, we need to be able to understand the language we're going to use to plan. And this will help you to create and interpret those workflow diagrams that you might be working with, right? It will help you reduce the risk of making mistakes on a day-to-day basis, right? You don't want to be too technical. Use simple language that people can always remember. make sure you understand who your audience is. So these are some things that I think one should do in order to have a successful BPM process, right?
Yeah, great. And now looking to the future, and I guess specifically over the next 2, 3, 5 years, where do you think organizations need to be spending their time, effort, and energy on when it comes to BPM? And obviously, every organization is at a different maturity level. Some organizations haven't even started attempted to document their processes yet, whereas some organizations are already using tools such as process mining, robotic process automation, different technologies like this. So, but over the next 2, 3, 5 years, for those organizations that are listening to this conversation, where do you think they need to be spending their time, effort, and energy?
Well, we know businesses sort of continue to evolve, right? And pardon me. And I think the processes evolve, the management flow evolves, right? And you're adding in technology innovation, you're adding in the evolution of business practices. So all this fits under sort of like a digital transformation. So I think the concept of digital transformation is important for the future. I think that an increasing integration of automation, like you mentioned, the Internet of Things, organizations are demanding higher productivity, improved risk management, better cost controls. So with all this increased demand, BPM softwares are looking toward implementing, like you said, robotic process automation, right? And I think you need to be able to you need improvement with agility and flexibility, right?
Right.
And you need to be able to deploy new applications and processes more quickly. So you've got RPA, you've got bots, you've got adaptive automation, you've got improved machine learning. I think this is sort of the way of the future for BPM.
Yes. Okay. That's interesting. And for someone that's listening right now, that maybe this is one of the first conversations they've been a part of or listened to that's been on the topic of BPM. Maybe they've heard about BPM through colleagues or other friends that are from other organizations. Where should that person go to learn more about BPM? Because obviously in 30 minutes we can only really scrape the surface on what is BPM and how does it deliver value for an organization. But for someone that wants to learn more, what direction would you point them in?
Well, you've got the usual suspects. You've got education providers, obviously LinkedIn Learning, Harvard Business Review, MIT Business Review, white papers, meetup groups, books, that kind of thing. But I think with the usual suspects, you're building that learning network. You're bringing in new ideas to the table. So that's one aspect. But also, I'd say take a look at APQC, American Productivity and Quality Center. They provide business reference models for all industries, including oil and gas, if it's upstream, downstream, airlines, all business processes for municipalities. And, join their organization if you can, get emails coming in from them. They provide teaching materials, benchmarking, for performance standards. They provide best practices, process and performance improvement, and of course, knowledge management. So I think APQC is definitely your way to go. American Productivity and Quality Center.
That's awesome. That's amazing. That's great. Well, Marcus, as I said before, we can only scrape the surface of BPM, but I think that, our conversation today, the audience is going to glean a lot from it. And even if they take one point away, even if they've listened to our conversation and there was one thing that you said that struck a chord with them, that it's going to spark a conversation back in their workplace, or it's going to really challenge their mindset, challenge their thinking, and that's where they're going to grow from. I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today and answering my questions and having this conversation with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd say as a quick outro, just to add to your point of what can you take home, I'd say processes across industries are always the same. Right? What is different is how things are done. Right? So each company has a purchasing order, for example, right? So what does change is just the how. How do we get the job